Hey everybody, Ramsey here. This is the Rajathon YouTube channel and wanted to do kind of a breakdown. I'm going to do a couple different videos on this where I describe kind of why I enjoy the types of books that I enjoy. I'd like to have a game playing in the background. This game was really cool. Kind of wanted to highlight it. It's called Lone Far Sails. I picked it up on Steam for $5.99. Really cool little game. Anybody can play it. It's not very complicated, but it was beautiful. The music was good, and really just want to let you guys kind of see this. It was a long gameplay, so I'm probably going to break it up. This will be the start of it, and then we'll keep on going, and it'll just be gameplay and just me doing a voiceover. So what I'm really excited for is talking about why fantasy is important to me, and then maybe some recommendations for people that are more just horror readers or more just sci-fi readers or something like that. And then kind of as we go to the different topics, being this is the first one, I'll link all those videos as soon as I get them, and I'll add them to this video where you can kind of say, hey, well, you know, I'm more of a sci-fi reader, or I'm more of a fantasy reader, but I don't read a lot of sci-fi, and kind of hopefully give you guys an idea on how I feel with that. So starting out, what is fantasy? Webster's Dictionary says, fantasy is a genre of literature that includes magical or supernatural elements as part of the plot, settings, or theme. Mythology and or folklore often play a very strong role. Really fun fact, the word fantasy comes from the Greek word phantasin, which means to make visible. So we're making visible the things that are fantastic. And I think authors do a really good job of creating a grand scope of things. Like Tolkien, really the start of what we call modern fantasy, he brought a lot of that together. The Hobbit is one of the first books I ever read in the fantasy genre, and I was excited to read that book. I remember coming back to my dad, who had recommended the book to me, and saying, Dad, this is amazing, and I wanted to tell him all about it. And it's really where my love of talking about books with people probably started. And then not long after that, when I was probably 14, 15, I had the recommendation for The Eye of the World, which is the first book in the Wheel of Time series, and just dove into that. He probably had 7 books written at that time, so I just kept on reading, and then I got the Ellie Modesitt series, the Chaos and Order Magicians. What is that called? It's called The Magic of Recluse is what that's called. And that series was really good. It's big, it spans thousands of years, and it's really, really interesting. And so fantasy is one of those things where you have elves, you have dwarves, you have dragons, you have all these beautiful and interesting parts of the story. And because you have those things, it's so exciting to step away from your everyday day-to-day life and go into this fantasy world. I know growing up, it was not as widely as accepted as it is now. Even my wife, when we first got together, I remember her saying, well, why do you read these books about wizards and dragons? And that's just stupid. And she, through me, has come to appreciate it so much more. She can watch a movie. Her favorite movie now is Jurassic World 2. I mean, Chris Pratt has a lot to do with that. But to know that she probably would have never watched that before she met me, and just my love of fantasy coming out through her, it's beautiful to see that, and to introduce people to fantasy. So starting out middle grade, I would say some of the greatest fantasy you can read. Just read most of the Narnia series, and Narnia is great. Harry Potter, starting at book 1, it starts as a middle grade, kind of moves to young adult. So you have the ability to say, you know, oh, well, I'm a little bit older. If you start with the middle grade stuff, you'll end up in young adult, and that's really, really cool. And then one of my favorite middle grade series, which could also kind of be taken as young adult, is the Fablehaven series by Brandon Mull. There's 5 books in that series, and I, as an adult, read it and really, really enjoyed it. And then I've recommended it to some children, and they've enjoyed it. Moving on to young adult, you have Aragon, which is really, really good. I recently read The Queen of Blood, which is book 1 in the Queens of Renthia series. Young adult is not really where I do well, because it focuses a lot more on romance. I'm not 100% sure why. Maybe it's geared towards young women more than young men, but There are some really, really great titles in there. I hear people talk about The Raven Boys, which I plan to read eventually. I hear them talk about Leigh Bardugo has a bunch of young adult series that are really, really good. You look at some of the other titles that are in, and they're fantastic. Trust me, just ask anybody on BookTube. They'll tell you some great young adult fantasy series that you can get into. And then when you're ready, and if you are an adult and you want adult fiction, and that fantasy is where you're like, man, I think that's where it's going, you can go anywhere from light fantasy, where you can do something that's like historical fiction, kind of like with Wildcat by J.P. Harker, where there's just a tiny bit of magic, or you can dive all the way in. You can go, Wheel of Time, Game of Thrones. I'm reading the First Law series, which is, really, really good as well. I'm about 100 pages in, and you can dive into stuff that's even more off the beaten path. Something like Senlin Ascends, which is an indie book that has kind of made its way a little bit more mainstream. So fantasy is definitely one of those things that I would love to hear. If anybody needed fantasy recommendations, please write it down in the comments. I would love to hear what you guys are into. What would make you happy in the fantasy genre, because it really has transformed my attitude towards life. Currently right now, Way of Kings is my favorite book. And the honor in that book, the way that people interact with one another, where you would lay your life down for someone else and to protect those that can't protect themselves. I've made that part of my life. I think that way when I go into situations. I would be willing to protect a woman or a child or a baby or another man. I feel that way now because fantasy has become such a huge part of my life. As I was talking earlier when I said, J.R.R. Tolkien, he created the intro for most of us into fantasy with The Hobbit and then with The Lord of the Rings. It's such a interesting point of view when you say, starting at Lord of the Rings to what we have now. And through that time span, there have been high points and low points. We've had really bad fantasy, and we've had really good fantasy. And even from the same author, I really enjoyed the start of the Kingkiller series by Patrick Rothfuss, and his Name of the Wind was, to me, amazing. And then he came out with his second book, and it was kind of fell flat a little bit. So you're never going to hit a home run on every fantasy series that you read, but I'm really excited for everybody to really get a good scope of these things. And you can even expand that by going into video games, movies. I mean, you look at our movies and TV shows lately, and you've got The Witcher. They're coming out with the Wheel of Time series. Game of Thrones was the most popular show on TV. So fantasy is no longer for the kids who play Dungeons and Dragons only. Everybody can enjoy this, and I'm really excited to share my love of these things with you guys, and I really want you guys to see that through everything that we're doing. So as we conclude, I wanted to just tell you guys, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, that'd be awesome. I'd love to talk to you guys about anything you want to talk to at all. If you have book recommendations for me, or if you want some from me, I definitely would love to do that. Please subscribe to the channel. I also have a Twitter and a Goodreads you can join. Those links are down in the description. And thank you so much. Bye.